Hey listeners, the intro grab this week is an AI called Russell reading an extract from Minister Shorten's recent speech to the AFR Government Summit. While an AI voice is on theme, if anyone has access to an actual recording of the speech, we will happily put that up instead. Just email us.
We need ethics, human-centered design, technical expertise, all contributing from the first phase, nurturing the good ideas though to excellent implementation. The need for this type of wisdom will gain particular prominence as we seek to harness AI. I would put it to you that AI is not going to kill jobs, but it will change them. Absolute statements of it's terrible or it's fantastic are dangerous and unhelpful. But it is a Promethean moment. We need to have a proper conversation about the right time and place to apply it. But one thing we do know when it comes to AI is that we can never risk it being designed or implemented in isolation from human considerations.
Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robodebt Royal Commission. My name is Alison Lloyd-Wright, and joining me on what always was and always will be Kaurna land is my fellow South Australian public servant, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And recovering public servant, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Alison.
So this is our third but last episode, not for the series, but on the algorithmic nature of Robodebt. In the first episode, we talked data, and in the second episode, look, we had a little bit of a meander, but we were trying to really talk about reviewing administrative decisions and how automating those decisions might complicate that process of review. And in this episode, we're going to go deeper on two specifically technical aspects of automated decision-making. One, the implication of what we've called here Jurassic Park ICT systems that sometimes underpin government. And two, thinking about the implications of machine learning and AI in this context. But we still haven't got to say the word justiciable. So, Caroline, for once and all, if a decision is made by a computer and it gets to the courts, is it justiciable?
Well, there is some question about this. Currently, the leading precedent is Pintarik versus the Deputy Commissioner of Taxation, which the full court of the Federal Court found that punching a bunch of information into a screen that then produced a template letter that said things wasn't a decision, because a decision requires a mental process.
Interesting.
It was, and because the template letter essentially implied that he didn't have to pay interest charges on his $800,000 tax bill. P.S. May I never get into a place where I have an $800,000 tax bill with interest of $300,000 on top of that. It was quite meaningful that was found not to be a decision, because then he had to pay them back bunches more money. I think there's lots of legal commentary on this, and I will post it in the show notes because I went down the rabbit hole. But it feels a bit overblown, and I reckon probably that's not going to be the definition of decision that the court lands on forever. And there's quite a compelling dissent about it already.
And surely this is what the next 10
frontier.
years, next frontier in legal judgments are. I mean, there's, I don't know if anyone remembers the appointment of a Supreme Court judge in the West Wing, where they're talking about the next frontier being privacy and the internet.
Yes.
And so law is where Sammy's arguing that privacy becomes, because of the context on the outside. So the context on the outside was social change.
Yep.
And so that was what they were predicting. And so the context here is increased automation, increased AI, increased things I don't even know the names of or words for, and what will be the series of legal precedent set that starts to create the kind of boundaries and framework.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the Royal Commission goes. So Commissioner Holmes makes these findings around a need for legislative clarity around decisions being reviewable. And she also talks about, transparency regarding the use of automation, that people should have a right to know that their decision's been made in an automated fashion and an ability to seek review. And then she kind of gets into this thing that I find very interesting, which is the idea of a right to an explanation. So you don't actually have a formal, you don't have a right to reasons under the ADJR Act. I thought that was, I had missed that in my first round of law school. I thought you always had a right to know what the reasons were, but no, you don't have a right.
No, I never thought that, and have seen many situations where, like, in a
black
range,
box.
black box, like. So I think that is an interesting recommendation. And I think it was easier to prosecute that as a complainant or a user of a system when there were people involved. And you often got reasons. It's going to get harder and harder, which is where the right to it will become more important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where I think this is the Jurassic Park ICT systems part of it, because down the rabbit hole, I found this fabulous New South Wales FOI case, which I'm sorry for texting to you guys compulsively over a period of days, where it was about a social housing tenant who was seeking access to the algorithm that determined the amount of rental assistance she was getting. And so she FOI'd the department. She FOI'd the department for their policies, for their processes, for her files, and for the algorithm. And she got the first things, but not the algorithm. And the department said, look, we don't own the algorithm. It's owned by a third-party contractor who built it, 37 years ago, back in the day, blah. And the Information Commissioner looks at it and for a range of technical reasons kind of comes up with an answer that says the department A, doesn't own the algorithm, B, has no right to demand the algorithm from the provider, and so C, she has no right to see it.
And so how do we even end up in a place where a private company owns the algorithm for making a government decision, right, which is determining the rental subsidy, and we can't get it back as a government because it is commercial in confidence?
And did anyone think of that at the beginning? Like, did everyone end up at this spot and go, whoa, hang on, didn't see that coming? Or as that was all being established, did anyone realise what the implications of that were going to be?
So I think exactly right. No one framed up the idea that the process that you embed in that is not necessarily government's property, and that when you go to re-tender in 10 years' time, because usually you kind of put a reasonably long time frame on these contracts, that
You've got to allow enough time for the blowout in setting it up in the first place.
so true. It's so true. And in fact, of course, we know it's never 10 years, then you always extend and extend. So like there's a whole part of that life cycle of ICT that I don't think we do think about.
Yeah, and who actually owns what in that arrangement?
Oh, yeah, I have had the same thing, and I think that's right. And thinking about the this year and the this customer. So, like, I need this system to solve this problem, and this cohort of customers are grumpy that can't do it online, or when they do it online, they have to do things that are silly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Not sure that I've ever then gone everything from what does it look like in 15 years' time to, I mean, you do a bit of who owns the data, and like it's life. I feel like
Who owns the IP?
I think we do bits of that.
Yeah.
But I would again go back to don't think we have a particularly good frame language like way of making sure that we future-proof government, and not just future-proof government in the sense of like money and contracts, but future-proof government decisions and I don't know, like the bigger bits.
I think we do that IP stuff, you're right, better now. But the reason why we called this Jurassic Park ICT is that the thing is you're always building on a platform that was built 25 years ago. And often the company that built it has like one person left and you've got them chained to a desk.
Legacy
in a corner.
Systems. Legacy systems.
No, legacy systems, but then that's the other one. Like I have 3 times been in charge of something where the person comes to you and says, I'm going to retire in 8 years. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And they're like, do you know these 3 things that I'm the only person?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So like no one can set up a recruitment if I can't hit this switch using a special button that I built myself.
Yes.
La, 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 la.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, so train someone else. Well, that system doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. No one's learning
So
Java 1 at
there are like
uni.
so many systems for which there is one individual human. I mean, if they wanted to rise up,
Oh, completely.
like we would be toast pretty quickly. And I think it's a really kind of gappy, missing part of our planning in government.
And I think there's something interesting about whether they're government employees or not, because I've been in the situation running those legacy systems where sometimes you're beholden to the contractor.
Indeed, me too.
Yes, I was thinking about some of yours. And then some of them, they are government employees. And it's better when they're government employees, but not heaps. Like you're still...
Well, they can still leave.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
they're not indentured.
They tend not to, which is like, thank you to them.
Yes, that's true.
But I wouldn't say that unless there's a whole team of them, having a single person doesn't do much better for you from a protecting risk than having an external contractor.
Yeah.
And so we've got these, like, in some cases, literally ancient IT systems, you know, your old, like, black screen, green writing, underpinning really complex government service delivery, decision-making. So AI didn't come up in the Royal Commission, but how should we be thinking about it now, right? It's in the news a lot lately. I think ChatGPT is the most commonly searched something in somewhere.
That was beautifully put.
Again, sounding super tech and expert there, Alison. It's the most something in the something in the something.
But, I mean, I think this is really something that we need to start to grapple with as government decision makers, and grapple with it from a position of curiosity, not fear.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's that thing about knowing the language. So I'm definitely no machine learning AI expert, but in going down the hole on this, I have learnt that machine learning is different from deep learning, which is the thing that underpins generative AI, although they operate on largely similar principles. But look, simplest explanation as I understand it is take lots of information, seek patterns, work out what the right answer is through large-scale crunching of probabilities, and then spit out answer. An answer might be an outcome in a kind of machine learning sense. This is a cat, this is not a cat, picture recognition. Or it might be a LinkedIn post describing from generative AI.
I have struggled with LinkedIn generally, and in my new role have tried to use it, as in tried to be a bit more active, because I'm not very salesy. I thought I'll try using ChatGPT for the first time. And because it only uses, because it can only reference what's already out there in social media, which is mainly people a lot younger than me who speak quite a bit differently to me, particularly much less formally and with much more hyperbole, and significantly apparently use an exclamation mark at the end of every sentence.
So you're saying you're getting LinkedIn posts like, Danielle got the riz.
Oh, like I just try and say the new episode of the pod up, and it kind of talks about these things. And so I throw in the facts into ChatGPT and I'm like, make it social media-y. And it just spits out too many words in a sentence. Like poor writing, for a start, boggles me.
Yes.
And
so wordy.
So wordy, so poor grammar. So poor grammar.
Nailing it.
The opposite of onomatopoeia. Anyway.
Totally. And so, because it can only use what's already there, and the problem, not the problem, but part of it is that all the writing that is there is from a different generation to me. Yes. And so these are the things that, as I've started to figure them out, I start to think, oh, that's a funny example. What do we do when all the information in human history has been entered by people?
White men? Sorry.
Well, less so on the internet, I would say. So, yeah. But no, but I was going to say people between the ages of 20 and I was going to try and figure out their birthday, but my math's not that good. But people who are, as of today, between the ages of like 17 and 28, that's very valuable. I'm super interested in young people, and not very reflective of the kind of breadth of human language or thought or history either. And so it depends on what you are pulling your AI from.
Yeah, the outputs are only ever as good as the inputs.
Yep.
But I think we could make the mistake of assuming, because a computer said it, that it is objective and unbiased. And I've been thinking about this in the context, in the last pod, I talked a little bit about the great British post office scandal, right? You know, this idea that the post office prosecuted people where the accounting system said they must have thieved, but they hadn't. And what the kind of latest round of hearings has really shown is just this kind of completely systemic racist bias in the whole process, right? So from the beginning, where the IT help desk, you hear from a guy who's on the IT help desk floor, who he said he was he was one of two people of colour on the floor, and he could hear other IT help desk guys saying things like, oh, there's another Patel scamming the system on the line. So from the starting point that if you want help from the IT help desk about what's going wrong, if you are Asian, you are going to get a less good service. So that puts you more likely to be prosecuted, right? Through to the prosecutions, where they've done this discovery to show that they have an investigation form in that prosecutions area of the British Post Office, which, I shit you not, used language like Negroid type and Chinese Asian type. So
I just can't.
It's revolting, right? So, but my point is, if you fed into an AI data about where do we find successful prosecutions in the post office, it is going to spit out
that.
Yeah. It is going to spit out subcontinental Asian postmasters
and
are
then
the
build
ones who
on
do
it.
Yep. And then build on
and
it.
then
And
have
then
a
entrench it.
self-generating.
Exactly right.
Which even what you're getting so far in generative AI that's focused on images, which, full disclosure, so is our logo. I did that on generative AI.
Sorry, we just need to pause on that. That is amazing.
Thank you. But if you ask...
See, I thought you got your texters out and a picture of Westminster and...
No. But if you ask generative AI to show you a typical doctor, lawyer, aged care worker,
white, able-bodied people.
until you get to aged care worker,
Of course.
ICT professional.
Yeah.
So it's really like the outputs are only ever as good as the inputs. And what we know from Robodebt is they were not quality inputs.
Exactly right. Like, and that self-selecting bias, just that thing you just said, Danielle, that's just making me think about it. Like, you could accidentally find yourself down a path where you are more and more, 90% of the cases that we come up with end in, and so, but you're missing the fact that the whole other population is not being examined in the same way.
It's interesting, and this. So we were at Uni Open Days last week and looking at humanities courses, and the pitch that humanities courses are having to make to people in a STEM world around, like, someone's going to need to do the philosophy and the thinking behind this new world of, because I mean, it's very kind of sexy for young people, the AI, the coding, ask a 7-year-old boy what they want to be a YouTube sensation or a gamer, like, so
Twitch streamer.
There's actually, like, there's fewer dreamers, philosophers, literature than there was 20 or 30 years ago.
Oh, I don't accept that premise at all.
Okay. But well, I think what they're having to do, though, is certainly sell that there's a value in that form of education.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the jobs are really clear on the other pathway and the jobs are becoming less clear on the humanities pathway. And so listening to, like, tertiary institutions sell what you were just saying, which is, like, who is going to do the philosophical underpinning of all of this? And it will not be the same person who writes the algorithm.
And we pretend that those two people can't have a meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that we need to do more, spend more time in, I think. Like, that's where I really feel, in my own career, I haven't spent heaps of times with the ICT guys who are building the systems. And I was telling Danielle offline before the pod that, I have regretted that choice afterwards.
And this is where I think, I guess a recurring thought I'm having across these 3 episodes is that it comes back to transparency and being able to tell people what has gone into the decision, what the inputs were, but also what the parameters and criteria were.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you actually need to spit out a proprietary algorithm in order to say these are the criteria against which you were assessed.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? So I used to administer a lot of grants without the aid of a whiz-bang computer system. And so those decisions...
I was just about to say Excel.
Yeah, Excel. Hello. Those decisions were human decisions, but it was very transparent to people who applied for the grant what they would be considered against. And I do think that question of the parameters that you're setting for the algorithm is a question for people who manage the policy of the decision-making as much as it is a question for the people who are going to interpret those parameters in a technical form.
But isn't that also, like, that bit would be useful to the citizen?
Yeah.
If I was in this situation and, like, the algorithm had been published as per the Royal Commission...
It means nothing to me.
I mean, look, it would mean absolutely nothing to me.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure it would anyway help me decide figure out whether I had been unfairly, whether the criteria had been assessed properly. So it goes back to yes, still staying in the algorithm and the computer, but the other part is just how transparent, how why don't we tell people what we're doing?
Yes.
Why was it never as obvious to people as it ought to have been that this number was calculated on the basis of your tax reporting against your Centrelink receipts, etc., etc.
And DHS explicitly hid that fact. Right. When you start with the language of, Catherine Campbell saying to the Senate, I don't know what you mean by Robodebt. Right? So there was an explicit hiding of the fact that there was algorithmic decision-making at various points in time, and obfuscation.
Yeah.
They'd be like, but there's lots of people involved. But hang on, the calculation is happening in a black box, right? So there's something about the hiding that was particularly terrible in this case. I guess just to nerd hole a little bit on this, your thought, Alison, about, you need to be clear about what you're feeding your AI, what data are you giving it, and then what the parameters are. My understanding of the kind of deep learning versus machine learning is the problem with kind of deep learning generative AI is that essentially you don't structure stuff up. So you can always say what data you've given it, but actually you don't give it the parameters. It works out its own parameters because they do this kind of crazy neural network thing. I don't know. Anyway, but the point is that you can ask someone who wrote ChatGPT how it is making the decisions and outcomes it's making, and they can't tell you because it has taught itself those.
It's pattern recognition.
Yes.
But I suppose I'm assuming that in the context of these episodes and what we're talking about, we're probably talking about outsourcing decision-making to a machine, right, in some way or another. And I do think we have to be... So I'm not sure the lesson of these episodes is about ICT and how we use it. I think the lesson of these episodes is how we tell people what goes into the decision making.
Yeah.
And if it is just generative pattern recognition, fine, let's say that.
Yeah.
And then allow the community to make the
yes.
do what they will with that information because they
yeah.
vote governments in and they vote governments out.
Yeah. This program is not meeting the needs that we need.
And that will all wash out if it is transparent, but it will not, in the sense of people will have a view one way or the other. But if it is not available, then that won't happen.
I've just checked the time and I'm able to just riff for a minute on my favourite topic on this because one of the things that we're talking about is we're talking about systems that make thousands of individual decisions, right?
Yep.
You get this, you don't get that. Yeah. I think that there is a real challenge in framing many of our public goods as individual entitlements. And actually, there's a thing where we should think about many of our public goods should be investments in collectives and in communities, not in individuals. Because the problem is when you get it to an individual entitlement, then you end up in this kind of litigious, I deserve it, you don't deserve it. And an obvious example, an area I worked in for a long time, is children with disability in schools, right? You can either drip individual funding, well, not either. You can drip individual funding on each individual kid in a classroom who has a disability. But that means that kids who haven't got a diagnosis, that means kids whose families can't, whatever. And kids come in and out of different needs.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Actually, a much more reliable way may be to understand what's the overall need of a community, of a town, of a school, and fund the overall population in a way, and then use human judgment as a way of allocating particular kind of additional resourcing within a classroom. So there's an example, I think, of if we want to... There's something about the way this kind of mass decision-making atomises us as well that I find a little bit problematic.
Yeah. So I've been doing a similar thing around, so we're in the context of tightest labour market in decades, right?
Yes.
It'd be really useful if there were greater incentives to get people who are already in the workforce to upskill or reskill into higher skill qualifications and positions. And all of the government incentives... almost all exist at the Commonwealth level.
Yeah.
And they all attract to the individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will fund you for your vet pathway. I will fund you for your university.
And so we place, because we say the benefit is individual, we're missing the part where the benefit is societal as well.
Yes.
That
like, I need the plumber and I'm not becoming the plumber.
Yeah. But exactly. So it is exactly that kind of I think there's been, I wrote a whole thesis on this, so let's not go into it, but a shift in the public and political discourse over decades away from community-based towards individual entitlement, risk and benefit.
Yes.
But then we also think two things. That closes the gate. Like, so the driver around how much we spend and what we spend it on, there's a bit of movement around at the moment about, well, we need more welfare advocacy bodies. And there's a part of me that just wants you to be able to pick up the phone and call someone who understands, who can help you.
Yeah.
Part of me goes, no, that's just entrenching the fact
Yes.
that we've made it so complicated and that the AI is, that the automation is hard to understand and all these different things. I'm like, no, I feel like anything we do in that space is going to entrench the idea that we shouldn't spend money making it better in the first place.
Yeah.
I've had the same thought. There's lots of evidence in the UK of success of healthcare navigators.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Which, great, but wouldn't it be awesome if you didn't actually need them?
so I have gone down this rabbit hole as well, and exactly that, which is, so I have a whole other thing that I think is relevant to this and might be another episode, which is around the role of social workers, for whom I love. Effectively, though, in some ways, the growth of them can be seen as the more complex we make government in order to try and save money and individualise everything is creating an industry of professionals
whose job it is to navigate that and maximise your personal outcomes. In that situation.
And I had a particular, not that long ago, about 4 years ago, with a social worker trying to resolve someone who was 64 and a half, so not eligible for aged care, but with nowhere to live, bed blocking, and watching them navigate local government, the private sector, the Commonwealth, trying to find a solution for this person was honestly like no senior public servant could have tried to figure it out. That's how complex it was when you took it down, which was there's no aged care facility, but you're not eligible for this, but you are eligible for that, but only eligible for that if you stand on a blue moon on a Friday and like it was quite extraordinary piece of work that I think no secretary could navigate that.
So just taking us back to our ICT roots on this, I do think there's an impetus for us here in thinking about, so if we think generative AI or even machine learning AI, if we think there are challenges with the black box nature of individual decisions that pop out, but if we recognise that the pattern seeking and probabilistic nature of with which that decision making is happening, is generally pretty helpful. I think as senior public servants, there's something for us to think about. How does that change the business of government? So we have kind of philosophical views around individual versus community entitlements, and that kind of is where we start in our life. But I think there's actually now also a practical impetus for us to think about, actually, the systems we're about to operate are probably going to be better at this kind of community level stuff than they are at the individual level stuff in some ways. And so what does that mean for our practice?
I completely agree. And I think it's the running of it that regardless of your values, it just becomes clearer and clearer that the attempt often to save money costs so much money.
Yes.
Yep.
And I think like Robodebt, classic example.
Yeah.
I mean, like we quote the repayback figure, but not the X number of dozens of public servants who lost 3 years trying to defend the thing.
Thousands.
How much did the Royal Commission
the Royal Commission, the lawyers, like all of that was an attempt to save money.
Yeah.
And so I think it becomes less ideological is what I'm saying. I think it just becomes around what is the most efficient. And we've got this thing, we've been led to believe that it's an article of faith that the way we're doing it at the moment, individual, target really hard, make the gap really narrow.
Yeah.
We without evidence, have assumed that will be the most cost-effective way to run a government, and there's no evidence for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, the lessons from this one are, I guess, I take your point. We do need to think about those ICT systems. But for me, this is more about systems in general and how we make them transparent, navigable and mostly right.
Yeah.
Because they won't always be right.
Yeah.
So Before we wrap up this one, just a few notes from me on our future episodes. The first is we've had lots of terrific feedback about people being desperate for new episodes, and we hear you and we're trying. But we are trying to fit these around some pretty big other job and life responsibilities. But because I am terrible at self-imposed deadlines, because I know that the person who made that deadline, she's a liar. I need to now publicly commit to episodes on behavioural insights and on values in the public service. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. Those of us in the employ of the state government speak in a strictly personal capacity, consistent with the Public Sector Code of Ethics that permits public servants to promote an outcome in relation to an issue of public interest, in this case, the betterment of the public service. Nothing we say should be taken as representing the views of the government or our employers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. If you want rigorous reporting on Robodebt, we recommend the work of Rick Morton at the Saturday Paper, Chris Nouse and Luc Henrique Gomez at The Guardian, Ben Eltham at Crikey, and of course, the Robodebt Royal Commission itself. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions, or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.